Well, good morning. I am so glad to see you all here today. And who knows what today is? It is week what of our series? Week 4. Week 4 of our Solomon series. There's 5 weeks, which means we have one more week of Solomon. And what did we talk about last week? Solomon's wisdom. What was the thing that he asked for? Remember that picture? I know Wanda has that picture burned into her mind, and we'll get there again because we'll talk a bit about last week as we talk about this week, but he asked for a listening heart, a heart to hear. And today, what I want to talk about is something else that Solomon is known for, Solomon's wealth. We talked about his wisdom, we talked about the temple, and now this morning I want to talk about his wealth. And here's how wealthy Solomon was. 1 Kings chapter 10. We'll just jump right into it this morning. All King Solomon's goblets were gold. Imagine that. You wake up in the morning. Ooh, what kind of a goblet should I use? Oh, I guess I should use a gold goblet for my coffee, for my water, for my tea. All of his goblets were gold, and all the household articles in the palace of the forest of Lebanon were what? Pure gold. Imagine, he has a palace of gold. Nothing was made of silver. Why? Well, because silver was considered of little value in Solomon's days. He doesn't settle for second place. He wants the finest goods. The king had a fleet of trading ships at sea, along with the ships of Hiram. Once every 3 years, the ships returned. And what did they carry? What did they bring back to Solomon? Gold, silver, which he obviously must have cast to the side, ivory, and apes and baboons. Man, this guy is living. And here's what we're told. King Solomon was greater in riches and wisdom than all the other kings of the earth. Is it safe to say that King Solomon had some money? As I was reading this, putting this together, the picture that came to mind was Scrooge McDuck. You remember that show? Remember DuckTales? And he would just jump into his money bin and he had all the money in the world and the Beasley Boys would come and steal his money. Well, here's King Solomon. He is the wealthiest man. No other king, we're told, rivals him. Here's what I want to do this morning. I want to look at the larger biblical commentary that's being offered on Solomon and his wealth, because a commentary about Solomon and his wealth, it shows up all over the place. It shows up here in Kings, but then we'll also find it in the New Testament and even back in Genesis. So we're going to move around to a couple of different verses this morning, and I want to talk about all the implications for us, and we'll talk about money, generosity, worry, and anxiety. Let's start with a question. According to Kings, where did Solomon's wealth come from? We looked at this a little bit last week, 1 Kings 3, beginning of the story of Solomon. Moreover, this is God speaking, God, this is in the dream when Solomon asked for that listening heart, I will grant you, Solomon, that which you have not asked for, both wealth and honor, so that in your lifetime you will have no equal among kings. Well, this was 1 Kings 3. We just read 1 Kings 10, and it seems like this promise has come to fruition. Because we're told, Solomon, there was no greater king who had as much wealth as Solomon. But where did his money come from, as we're told here in Kings? And you can all answer, it's okay. From God. Yes. His wealth was to be seen as a gift. Where's the source of his wealth? God. And I would argue that it's the same for all of us. It's the same for you. And the question for Solomon at the beginning of his story, at the beginning of his reign, and we've seen where it's gone off the rails a little bit, but the question at the very, very beginning, we looked at this question early on in our series, it's the same question for all of you here this morning. What will you do with what you have been gifted or blessed with? What will you do with your blessings? Solomon was given great wealth. The commentary is that it was a gift from God. And the question then is, well, what will you do with this great wealth that you have accumulated? What will you do with this great wealth that you have been given? And here is the criteria. And in order to understand the criteria for judging Solomon and how well or how poorly he did, we actually have to go early on in the story. We have to go all the way back to Genesis. because here's something about the Bible. Genesis through 2 Kings tells one complete story. If you want to understand what's happening in Kings, you have to look all the way back in Genesis. And early on in the story, right in the beginning, when God is forming a people, here's what we're told. Here's what Abram is told from God. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. Again, this is all a gift. I will give this gift, this blessing to you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. What is the purpose of all the gifts, the blessings that we have received? So that we can now be a blessing for others. I will do all this for you so that now you can turn around and bless others with that which you have been given. So the question for Solomon in the beginning of his story is this: will Solomon use his wealth, his blessings, to bless others or to serve himself? Now let's see how he used his blessings. 1 Kings chapter 10. Solomon accumulated chariots and horses. He had 1,400 chariots, 12,000 horses, which he kept in the chariot cities. Imagine that. Like, one city is not enough, so you needed just a chariot city. You've been to the chariot cities around Ardsley, right? It's like just where all the chariots are kept. And also with him in Jerusalem, the king made silver as common in Jerusalem as stones. I mean, that's how much money this guy had. Silver as common as stones, and cedar as plentiful as sycamore fig trees in the foothills. Solomon's horses were imported from where? Egypt. Whenever you read Egypt, you're starting to cue Darth Vader music a little bit here. And from Q, the royal merchants purchased them from Q at the current price. They imported a chariot from Egypt for 600 shekels of silver and a horse for 150. They also, and this is very, very important right here. It's one of the throwaway lines normally when we read it, but this line right here tells us something very, very important. They also exported them, the chariots and the horses, to all the kings of the Hittites and the Arameans. Buying and selling horses and chariots. In the world at this time, in the ancient world, what were the horses and the chariots used for? War. Here's a few pictures of the modern day equivalent of what Solomon was buying and selling. Yes, we laugh a little bit, but in reality, Solomon has now become an arms dealer. He's buying and trading military weapons. Is he blessing others or harming others with his wealth? Yeah. That criteria in the beginning, so that you can bless others. And yet, what is Solomon doing with his wealth? He's buying so that now he can turn around and sell at a profit these weapons that cause great harm upon other people. Let's look at another portion of Solomon's story, and this one actually takes place after Solomon has died and his son has now taken over the kingdom. His son Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all Israel had gone there to make him king. Now remember, Solomon has died, his son Rehoboam is about to take over the throne. When Jeroboam, son of Nebat, heard this, he was still in Egypt where he had fled from King Solomon because he's his enemy. When he heard this, he returned from Egypt. So they sent for Jeroboam. He, the whole assembly of Israel, went to Rehoboam, and they said this to him. He's about to become king, and here's what the officials, some of the leading figures in Israel, tell the king. They're pleading with him right here. Your father, Solomon, put a heavy yoke on us. But now, please, lighten the harsh labor. We looked at this a few weeks ago. The harsh labor was to do what? Build a temple. Please lighten the harsh labor and the heavy yoke he put on us, and we will serve you. It was really, really difficult when your father was in charge. He placed such a heavy yoke upon us. And who knows what this heavy yoke was? Taxes. Please, can you cut the taxes? We aren't able to pay our bills. We're struggling to put food on the table. We're struggling just to make it. That heavy yoke that your father placed on us, it was too much. Please, if you lighten it, things will go much better for all of us. Don't you have enough money already? Why did Solomon institute heavy taxes? To pay for all of his building projects and his lavish lifestyle. Last week, we looked at this. He had 700 wives of royal birth. And he had to make all 700 happy. They were royalty. So Solomon instituted taxes on the normal, common people, heavy taxes that caused them to struggle to make it, just so that he could continue living lavishly, padding his pockets, and that all those at the top, his officials, his people, would also be happy with him and be able to live the type of lifestyle that they had grown accustomed to. Solomon and all those at the top benefited at the expense of the ordinary. There was cheap labor. He employed slaves to build the temple, and now taxes. Is he blessing others or harming others through his wealth? Yeah, that criteria in the very beginning. What will you do with your wealth? What will you do with that which you have been gifted with? Well, it looks like Solomon, he's been struggling with that one. Now, let's look at what the New Testament, how the New Testament looks at Solomon, because sometimes you have to look backwards in history and you realize, oh, maybe it wasn't so bad. Sometimes you're in the moment and you're like, oh my goodness, so bad. But then you get a couple of years distance and you're like, well, it really wasn't as bad as they made it out to be. Here's what we're told about Solomon, 1 Kings chapter 10. The weight of the gold that Solomon received yearly was 666 talents. Now, at this time, 666 didn't necessarily mean the thing that it means for us today, but fast forward in the story a little bit to the book of Revelation, talking about the embodiment of evil. Here is John. This calls for wisdom. Let the person who has insight calculate the number of the beast, for it's the number of a man. That number is what? 666. This is a commentary on Solomon. They're taking that number. Here's how much gold he acquired. Here's how much gold he took in yearly. And now this number is being equated with the embodiment of evil. Is this a positive or negative assessment of Solomon and his reign? Just want to make sure you're all tracking with me this morning. Was he seen, looking back, was he seen as a blessing or a curse for the people? Now let's look at Jesus' assessment of Solomon and his wealth. This shows up in the Sermon on the Mount, the greatest hits of Jesus as he begins his ministry. Here we are, Matthew chapter 6. In the middle of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says this, "No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Therefore, I tell you, don't worry about your life." Thanks, Jesus. Is that not really difficult to live into that? Don't worry about your life, what you'll eat or drink, or about your body, what you'll wear. Is not life more than food and the body more than clothes? Look at the birds of the air. They don't sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? Can any one of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life? The answer to that is no, and worrying will actually remove hours from your life. And why do you worry about clothes? See how the flowers of the field grow? They don't labor or spin, yet I tell you, not even who? Solomon, in all of his splendor, with everything that he had, Even Solomon wasn't dressed like one of these. If that's how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow thrown into the fire, will he not much more clothe you, you of little faith? This is not a positive assessment of Solomon. This is not a model to emulate. Instead, this is a critique. Solomon's way of living will only breed worry and anxiety. And my guess for all of you here this morning is that's not what you want for your life. That's why you're here, because you're after the peace that God brings. You don't want any more worry and anxiety than you already have, because chances are we all have plenty of things to worry about. And if we could just move the dial ever so slightly toward peace, wouldn't it feel like a weight was being lifted a bit from our shoulders? And Jesus is saying, if you look at the example of Solomon and move in his direction and embody him, well, the only thing it's going to do is put more burdens upon you and create more anxiety and more worry. Walter Brueggemann, in his book Solomon that we've been looking at, here's what he says about Jesus' assessment of Solomon in the Sermon on the Mount. In fact, the rhetoric serves to deconstruct Solomon, to suggest that his unparalleled wealth is in fact a pretentious, empty show that does nothing to relieve anxiety. You ever think, oh, if I just get a little bit more money, then all the anxiety I have will go down? If I were just to reach this place, to get here, well, then all that worry and anxiety would just somehow melt away. Solomon is singled out as a cipher for failed wealth and for futile, empty, self-securing. Here's Jesus. No one can serve two masters. All throughout the story of Solomon, Solomon is trying to serve two masters. He's trying to serve God, and he's trying to serve money. And where has that way led him? Few thoughts. Being consumed in his pursuit of money, power, and more. Money, power, more ate Solomon up. He became a shell of who he was in the beginning of his story. Solomon was never satisfied. This endless need for consumption, and this is the world that we live in. We live in a world of endless consumption. Just consume more. Get more of this. Consume more entertainment and you'll be happy. He was constantly chasing the new. Silver didn't do it for him. He needed to up the game to gold, and then he had to get some of these exotic animals as well, apes and baboons. He was always chasing the new. The normal wasn't good enough for Solomon. Having a dog and a cat wasn't good enough for Solomon. He needed an ape and a baboon to go with all the rest of the hamsters and frogs and worms and whatever else he kept in his little sanctuary. It created disconnection from God. His pursuit of money and more disconnected him from his relationship with God. It created rampant injustice, and great harm was done to not only the people of his kingdom, but those around as well, as he was buying and now selling military weapons to be used in other parts of the world. Solomon was trying to get things as cheaply as possible. America 2025. And it harmed people. And eventually, if we know the story and where the story of Kings leads us, it led to societal collapse. Because this way of living cannot stand. This is not a firm foundation upon which to build one life or an entire nation. Ultimately, this way of living led to worry and anxiety. So then, Jesus, what is the better way? Right before Jesus said no one can serve two masters, He says this, "Don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moss and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moss and vermin do not destroy, where thieves do not break in and steal, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." And here's what I want us to look at right here. The eye is the lamp of the body. Your eye is a window into your soul. If your eyes are healthy, if you have a good eye, and this was a metaphor employed all throughout the ancient world, if your eye is good, if your eye is healthy, well, then your whole body is filled with light. But if your eyes are bad, if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? Good eye, if you had a good eye, and we're not talking about like 20/20 vision or something like that. We're talking, you ever see someone and you just, there's this sense that you have, there's something shady about them, and you can't define it, but you can just sort of, you can pick it up, and there's a reason. You don't trust someone, you feel like they're trying to hide something from you. Well, a good eye, but then there's other people you look at, you're like, that's a good person. I trust them. I don't know why, but I just have this trusting feeling with them. A good eye, it was proof of an inner light, an inner way of being that was pure, that was filled with peace. But a bad eye, on the other hand, if you're like, man, that person, he's got a bad eye, you're talking about someone who is selfish, someone who covets, someone evil or envious. Good eye, there's a person of generosity. There's a person of goodness. There's a person of light and love. It just emanates out of their being, and you can see it in how they show up in the world. But then there's others, and their eye, it doesn't look as clear. It's not as healthy. It's that bad eye, and it's someone who has made life all about themselves. Generosity leads to a good eye. It leads to this lightness, goodness, a radiance. Generosity leads to less anxiety and less worry, more peace. I put it this way, I don't know where I have it, I think it's in a later slide. Generosity is the antidote for selfishness. So let's wrap it up with 4 very, very practical ways to worry less this week. And here are 4 different things that you can put into practice this week so that you can begin to worry less. We talked about Solomon. We looked at all the negatives of Solomon, but I don't want to end the story there because I want to give you something practical and helpful because we all want to worry less. So here's 4 things you can do this week to worry less. And they're based off of Jesus' critique of Solomon and his wealth. First, very, very practical. Participate in one act of generosity this week. I have a list of a few things that you can do. And feel free to add your own thing. Bake someone something. Buy someone a meal. Buy them a cup of coffee. Buy someone a gift card. I've been given like a $10 gift card to Starbucks. I love that person forever. Send someone a gift in the mail. Maybe you don't have a lot of resources. Send a card to someone in the mail, a handwritten note. Hey, just thinking about you. First way to worry less, you give something away. Here it is. Generosity is the antidote for greed and endless consumption. It's the antidote for making life all about you. You're taking that which you have been blessed with, and now you are going and blessing others with that which you have been gifted. Here's the thing about Solomon. He had forgotten his heart's true desire. Last week we looked at this. What was his heart's true desire? He wanted a listening heart. He wanted the listening heart. He had forgotten this. And his desire that was pure, it shifted ever so subtly. And it became distorted. and he had forgotten to see his wealth, his blessings as a gift. When we stop seeing our wealth, our money, our blessings as a gift, we begin to make life all about ourselves. And we are filled with this never satisfied desire to get more and more, to continue consuming and accumulating. And the truth is, that way of living will never satisfy. Second way that you can worry less this week, come up with a list. Here's the question that I want you to sit with this week. What is your enough? Jesus' teaching, it's about birds, flowers, grass. This is actually a commentary on the manna and quail in the wilderness. Jesus said, God would say to the Israelites, I want you to gather enough for how often, for how long? One day. When they gathered more than enough for just the day, what would happen to it? It would rot. It was a picture of their soul. As you begin to go after and take more than you need, more than enough for you, it's as if your inner world begins to rot a bit. So the question I want you to ask this week is, what is your enough? A few questions to think about. Do you need 15 streaming subscriptions? Do you need the bigger house, car, whatever it happens to be? Do you need the latest phone? You ever see those lines waiting for the new iPhone? That is not creating peace. It's the opposite. Do you really need the latest gizmo technology? What about this one? Do you need one more shirt? One more pair of shoes? How about this one? Do you need to keep up with Sally from HR? Or do you need to one-up your neighbor to show that you are better than them? You determine your enough, and then you stick with it. This is enough for me, and I'm going to hold the boundary here. And then you revisit this on a regular basis. Life changes, and so your enough, it might move in this direction or it might move in this direction. What is your enough? You set a limit, you set a boundary, and then you stick to it. And you don't let the rest of this anxiety-ridden, consumeristic culture world cause you to stray from that boundary. You set your limit, and you live in peace. The more you have to manage, the more there is to worry about. What is your enough? Here's number 3. Third way to worry less this week. Be present to this day. One of the most helpful things for me, as I've been seeing a therapist for many years now, is to realize that anxiety is projecting a future that may never come. And sometimes I'll be talking about something, and he'll be like, hold on a second here. You're talking about something that you never know if it's actually going to happen. So why are you worrying yourself about this when it's not your reality right now? Jesus says this, Sermon on the Mount, therefore, don't worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. Turn that into a bumper sticker. Each day has enough trouble of its own. I found this. I don't know how true it might be, but according to research, up to 90% of the things people worry about never happen. Oh my gosh. Is that not insane? Even if it's not 90%, imagine if it was just 50%, which means that out of 2 different things that you're worrying about, most likely at least one of them will never actually happen. And then of the remaining 15% that do happen, which I don't know how 90 and 15 equals 100, but let's just call it 10%. Of the remaining 10%, call it 30, 40%, however much, the things that actually do happen that you worry about, 79% of people find the challenge is easier to handle than expected. How often do we worry about a future moment that never arrives? Or we're worrying about a future moment and then arrives, we're like, oh, that wasn't as bad as I made it out to be. And you had all these sleepless nights. You had all this worry and anxiety churning around within you. And then it happens, you're like, oh, I had that. I was fine. I was okay. And then here's number 4. Remember, your true value isn't based on material possessions. Your true value is not based on how much you have, but your true value is based on the endless love that God has for you. The endless love that you were birthed with. And this love that is always upon you. Jesus talking to all those who gathered on the hillside. Are you not much more valuable than the birds, the flowers, and the grass? Your value is not defined by what you have or how much you have, but your value is based on the love that you were born with and a love and a value that you could never lose. So there's 4 ways to worry less this week. I would love to have you report back next week and let me know how they go. What did you give away? How did it feel? What about that list? Was it easy? Was it hard? Your enough list. Let me know how it goes. We'll talk about it Wednesday evening at Debbie's in Hawthorne. And let me pray here for us. And we have one more week of Solomon. We'll finish up with Solomon, and then we're going to move into our October series, Stranger Things of Scripture.